Hi everyone, Stefan here again from Salford and Manchester Gaming Haven, and welcome to part 2 of Stef Paints Minis to an acceptable standard, layering working with gold. I'm sorry this is coming to you a lot later than I originally intended. I tried to record this video the first time round and I was coughing and spluttering so much that it was horrible, and then I tried to record it a second time and I ran out of space on my camera, so it cut off halfway through. So hopefully it's third time lucky, and hopefully this time you'll get a video that's useful and informative. So last time I talked to you a little bit about the stages that you need to go through to produce a really good, rich gold, and a gold that has a lot of texture and definition. So I'm going to talk to you about layering specifically, and that's what these videos are aimed at doing. But obviously I also want to talk to you about the whole process and talk you through the process. So if you remember from the first video, I showed you this particular miniature, which has been base coated using the spray paint Retributor armor. I've tidied it up a little bit using the pot. You'll notice I haven't glued this one down to the base yet. This is actually a hero character, so his base has been painted separately and I'm going to paint him separately. So what I want to do first, before I get to layering, and I'm going to use this miniature for an example of layering, but I'm just going to put him to one side for a second. What I need to do before I can layer is I need to shade, and I talked to you about using right clan flesh shade wash to do the shading, and I just want to show you how to do that if you aren't very comfortable with washes. As I say, these videos are aimed at beginners to intermediate painters. Very important when you're using shades, very important when you're washing miniatures and shading miniatures, is that you don't let the shade settle in any one place until you're completely finished, and really you shouldn't be letting it pool anywhere. So what we're gonna do is do an all over wash. So we don't have to be too neat. We load our brush up with right clan flesh shade. We don't have to be particularly neat. We want to get this in all of the gold areas, so it's the vast majority of the miniature. And we've only painted the base coat anyway, so we're not going to be ruining anything by doing an all over wash. But you'll notice I keep the brush moving at all times and I keep the wash moving. I don't want that wash to settle and pool. Even in these recesses, he has a shoulder pad or a pauldron that's in the shape of a lion's face, and there's a lot of recesses there, a lot of detail. I do want the wash to get into those recesses, and I do want to get it into that detail, but I don't want it to pool. If it pools, I'm going to get that detail smudged. I'm also going to get some very, very strange colors. I'm going to get some very strange finishes. It's not going to look particularly good, and also it's going to clog up parts of the miniature, so I don't want that to happen. So I'm going to continually move this. Very important when you're doing any shading, especially if you're ever doing an all over shade like I am of a miniature. If you're going to shade an awful lot of a miniature or the whole of a miniature with a particular single shade, very important that you do it all in one go and don't take any breaks. What will happen is if you take a break in the middle of the shading step, then that shade will dry and you'll end up with little lines sort of where you've finished shading that are almost impossible to get rid of. So we don't want to have to deal with that. So we want to make sure that we've got enough time and enough shade, enough paint, to make sure that once we start our shading process that we can finish it all the way through. And we don't leave any bits undone. We make sure at the end, and I always double check at the end of the shading phase, that I've covered absolutely everything I want to cover with that shade. I haven't left anything undone, because if I have, it's going to be a real pain to go back and fix it in the next stage. So what we want to do is just keep, as I say, keep that shade moving. Hopefully you can see that, and it's starting to get a lot more depth and a lot of definition. You'll notice I'm being fairly liberal. I'm not just whacking it any old way, and I am moving it around, but I'm also being fairly liberal with the amount of shade I'm using. That's possible on this because I'm doing an all over shade. This would be the same if you were painting something like Space Marines for Warhammer 40,000, where the armor covers the vast majority of the miniature and it's pretty much one color for the entire miniature and then some details. Obviously it's true here with a Stormcast Eternal. So this is I think a Knight Questor with the Hammers of Sigmar paint scheme. It's going to be true for Eldar in power armor. It's going to be true for Necrons. It's going to be true for a lot of miniatures by Games Workshop and other providers as well, other miniature producers as well, where miniatures are ostensibly one color, or the vast majority of the miniature is a single color, particularly if that is armored. Then you can do an all over wash like this. So you can be fairly liberal with the amount of stuff you're putting on here, but you also at the same time, you don't want to clog it, you don't want it too much, also you don't really want to waste it. You'll notice what I'm doing here is I'm brushing some onto this cloak. The cloak isn't even going to be gold, but what I'm doing is where I've put a little bit too much, particularly here around the head, and there's some little holes here that I don't want to clog up. I'm just brushing that away. I'm getting rid of the excess onto the miniature. Just keep moving it until I'm happy that all of the gold areas are covered in raglan flesh shade, and I've got that shade on, I've got that depth to my colour. I'm just going to give it a quick look around. I think that's done. Hold that up to the camera. Hopefully you can see that that is now, mostly I've got it by a funny angle, but hopefully you can see that's now pretty much covered out. Obviously I haven't gone over the blade. I haven't really done much with the front of the shield because that's going to get designed. I haven't gone over the scroll work really, or this cloak, because that's not going to be gold, or the plume, that's not going to be gold. But all of his armour, I've gone over that, and I've got raglan flesh shade on all of that. So I'm just going to put him to one side. I'm going to close up my raglan flesh shade, make sure that doesn't dry out, and put that away. And you'll notice, hopefully, on my desk, that I only have the paint and I only have the tools that I need for this stage. So once he dries out, I'll put him to one side. Once he dries out, he's going to look a lot like this. And this is essentially just retributor armour with an all-over wash of raglan flesh shade, and it's ready to be layered. And that's what we really want to be talking about today. So what is layering? And this is, as I say, something that a lot of people ask me about at our events at Salford and Manchester Gaming Haven. It's something that people find difficult to move on to. You know, you learn how to do bases, washes and dry brushes, and you get kind of comfortable with that, and you don't really push yourself onto doing layering. And it is a little bit more difficult. It is a little bit more of an advanced technique, but it's not so difficult. I think it's something that everybody can master with a little bit of practice and a little bit of understanding about what it is we're trying to achieve. I think the biggest thing that puts people off layering is understanding really what they're trying to achieve. Now, as with any paint, I'm about to layer with Auric Armour Gold. With any paint, I want to thin it. It's very important that we thin paint, particularly when we're layering, but pretty much at every stage. Because like I was moving the shade around on the first miniature, we don't want to clog up any detail. So if we use multiple thin coats, we're not going to clog up any detail. Also, we can always add more paint, but we can't take away paint. So if we put too much on, we have to paint over it, and it's difficult to paint over it. If we make mistakes with a thin layer, it's really easy to fix because it's really easy to paint over. And also, when it comes to layering, it helps us build transitions. So really, what is layering? Essentially, layering is adding multiple coats of progressively lighter paints over less and less of the miniature each time, working towards where the miniature would be lightest, where the light would hit the miniature the most, so that we create dark to light effects on our miniature. And that's essentially all layering is. Ordinarily speaking, I would thin my paint with water. I'm not going to do that this time. I'm going to thin it with lime medium. Pretty much all acrylic paints are to a certain extent hydrophobic. They don't want to be with water. They don't like being with a water suspension. You'll notice that if you don't shake up your paints often enough, you don't use them, they do start to separate. So they're all fairly hydrophobic, but this is especially true of metallic paints. Metallic paints in particular, the pigments that are used to create metallic paints are incredibly hydrophobic. Now, I could still dilute it with water, but it's better to dilute it with lime medium. It's going to give me a better, smoother product with a better consistency. If I were made of money, I'd probably thin down everything with lime medium, but I'm not, and I'm quite happy to use water to thin down non-metallics. So I've thinned it down and should dilute it to around about half its original consistency, half its original viscosity. Load my brush up. I don't want too much on. I'm just going to get the tip. We should never really have more paint than just on the tip of the brush. We don't need to use any other part of the brush, so we're just going to get the tip loaded up with a little bit of that Auric Armour Gold. And what I'm going to do with this layer now is I'm going to work, and I'm not going to paint over the entire miniature. I'm not going to cover absolutely everything, but I am going to cover up where it would be lightest, and I'm going to work from darkest to lightest. And it's important to remember when we're layering that the most paint that you'll leave on the miniature is at the point where the brush leaves the miniature. So we should always brush towards where we want that colour to be the thickest. And I'm going to have to do at least 2 thin coats. This isn't going to cover it in one go, and as you'll notice, it isn't a particularly solid colour. But what I'm doing is, with very smooth brush strokes, I'm working from outwards to inwards, from the side of where his ribs would be, in towards the center of his chest, because that's where I want the most paint to be. That's where it's going to be the lightest, and I'm just working that auric armor gold into that area. I'm basically going to do that around the entire miniature, and I'm probably going to have to do this at least twice, possibly 3 times. We'll see. And I'm just going to work that paint towards the center there of his chest, and you'll notice you'll notice it's starting to get a little bit lighter again. It's starting to be a little bit shinier. I'm going to go around the pauldron here. So I'm covering most of the miniature with this, because this is our mid-tone. This is going to be the majority of the miniature is going to be this color. It's going to be auric armor gold. But I don't want all of it covered, and I don't want it all covered everywhere. I want there to be some darker parts, particularly in the recesses, particularly in the deeper areas where light wouldn't get to. Just going to clip into this chest here. I want to leave the darker parts, the more recessed parts of the miniature with the raglan flesh shade, and some of it will be just retributor armor as well. So we'll get a transition from raglan flesh shade over retributor armor all the way up to auric armor gold. Now, when you're doing, and this is the mid-tone, when you're doing the layering, if you've got a miniature like this, so this is a Liberator that has rivets on it, this one's got obviously bolts and rivets in the armor pieces, you don't need to layer up those things because you're going to go straight to a highlight with those anyway. It's a little bit of a waste of time and paint to put auric armor gold on that part. But I probably will be covering some of this auric armor gold up again with the next step, which is obviously going to be my edge highlight. Not my zenithal, but my edge highlight, which is the next step. I'm not going to show you all of this. This is going to be incredibly boring if you watch me paint the entire miniature, but hopefully you're starting to see what it is I'm trying to achieve. And I'm always brushing, hopefully you'll notice this, I'm always brushing out to in or down to up. I'm always brushing towards the lightest part. I'm always brushing to where the light would catch it the most, and I'm leaving parts of the miniature where the light wouldn't catch it or where it looked darkest. I'm leaving those with the raglan flesh shade. I'm not going to layer those up with the auric armor gold, so that we get a nice contrast, which is going to give us the effect of color, the effect of light, this metallic effect that we're trying to achieve, something that looks like gold. That's really what we're trying to get at here. So hopefully you've got an idea what the technique is for layering. Okay, never put too much on your brush. You can always go back and put more on. It's better to have more strokes, less paint, and build up with thinner coats until we've got something we're happy with. If we're just going to whack a load of paint on, we're not going to get the effect we want. Yeah, sure, it'll be quicker, but we're going to look at it, we're not going to be 100% happy with it, and we could have just taken a little bit more time. It's not the end of the world to take a little bit more time and just get nice thin coats on. Look, you can see it's already starting to look a lot more gold. There's a lot more shine to that chest piece already. I've hardly started. So I'm going to do that around the entire miniature. I'm just going to show you some of the parts that I'll definitely do. Obviously the top of this knee plate is going to get painted in auric armor gold. You see how it sort of sticks out here? That would definitely catch the light, so that's definitely going to get auric armor gold. But as that bit sort of joins the rest of the knee plate, I'm going to leave that. I'm going to leave that in raglan flesh shade. Obviously this lightning bolt on the knee is going to get painted, and the vast majority of the knee piece is going to be painted, but I'm just going to leave where the lightning bolt joins the knee, just going to leave that. Where the top part here that's jutting out joins the knee, I'm just going to leave that. Where it gets into the bottom fold, I'm just going to leave that. So I'm going to leave obviously the recessed parts, and you'll notice hopefully my strokes are always into the lightest part. I'm always taking my brush off the miniature at the point that would be the lightest, at the highest point where it would catch the most light. And it's important to get into that habit when we're layering. That's almost as important as thinning the paints down, is the strokes that we're doing, making sure we're brushing towards the lightest part of the miniature. Now this is sometimes the opposite. If we're working with flesh on torsos, for example, maybe not on faces, but on torsos, bodies, we sometimes work lightest to darkest instead of darkest to lightest, because actually your skin is the darkest where the sun would hit it, because obviously it gets tanned. Obviously I'm talking about pale flesh here, white flesh. And we also do that when we're painting flames. Obviously we work lightest to darkest with flames, because as you move away from the flame, getting darker, because the flame is a point of light. It isn't something that light is hitting and reflecting off. It's a point of light. So the further we get away from the center, the darker we get, until we get to black, where the smoke would start to form. So hopefully you're getting an idea. Just painted this bottom rim here, the knee. Hopefully you're getting an idea just from these couple of minutes that I'm showing you of the technique that I'm using just to slowly build up Auricama gold. I'm not rushing it. I would normally do this in a batch of, say, 5 liberators, so that I know that once I've got to the 5th one, I can probably just go ahead and start again on the 1st one, because the paint will probably be dry. But hopefully you've got an impression there of what it is I'm trying to achieve with this layering technique. In the final part, I will show you how to do edge highlighting and zenithal highlighting. So that will be with Liberator Gold and then with Stormhost Silver. And then hopefully you'll have an idea how to do an entire Liberator from start to finish and how to achieve this gold. So hopefully you found that interesting. I'm going to go ahead and paint that up, and I will be back in part 3 to show you how to do edge highlighting and zenithal highlighting with gold. Okay, until then, bye bye.